UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer lands in Beijing, marking the first visit by a British Prime Minister to China since 2018. He's scheduled to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang in Beijing on Thursday, accompanied by a large delegation of around 60 British business and cultural leaders. Starmer stressed that when it comes to Britain's economic future, like it or not, China matters. Well, China is the UK's third largest trading partner and is linked to around 370,000 British jobs. Starmer says the UK cannot afford to ignore such economic realities, even while recognising serious disagreements. Analysts say discussions are likely to be in sectors where Britain has clear strengths and where Beijing may still be open to foreign investment.
I think from a UK perspective, as I say, it'll be those areas where, A, the UK is in a really strong position. Our life sciences, professional services, green finance, and areas where also China is still receptive to foreign capital and might be open to considering market access reforms. The other question, obviously, is whether the UK wants to attract Chinese investment in those areas where it's China that increasingly excels. And I think that's a live conversation that a lot of countries in Europe are having.
Well, the visit comes after the UK approved plans for a new large Chinese embassy in London. At home, critics, including figures linked to the Trump administration, warned that a new Chinese embassy in London could enable espionage. Well, the trip also takes place against a backdrop of global uncertainty and strained transatlantic relations as Western countries look to China for economic stability. However, many analysts say British approval of the embassy was a key factor clearing the way for Starmer's trip to Beijing. The UK's relationship with China has been strained under the previous Conservative leadership, leaving Starmer with a difficult starting point. UK-China ties began to collapse during the tenure of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And when Rishi Sunak took office, he signalled an end to the golden era, calling China a systemic challenge to Britain's interests and values. Meanwhile, the UK opposition is warning that China poses a significant national security threat. Conservatives argue the government is offering concessions without enough in return. Well, last year, Britain's domestic intelligence agency, MI5, issued a warning to lawmakers about alleged Chinese cyber attacks and espionage operations inside the UK. China has also been accused of abuses against the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, as well as the treatment of Hong Kong pro-democracy figure Jimmy Lai, who faces a possible life sentence. Downing Street, however, says Starmer will raise challenging issues where UK values and interests differ from China's. China, though, is striking a positive and forward-looking tone ahead of Keir Starmer's visit.
After taking office, the Labour government has expressed clear willingness to develop relations with China in a consistent, long-term, and strategic way, and has actively promoted dialogue and cooperation between the two countries. China stands ready to take this visit as an opportunity to enhance political mutual trust with the UK, deepen practical cooperation, open a new chapter of sound and steady development of China-UK relationship, and together make due efforts and contributions to world peace, security, and stability.
Well, the timing of Starmer's visit is also significant. It comes just days after US President Donald Trump threatened a 100% tariff on Canada if Prime Minister Mark Carney pursued a trade deal with China. Well, Starmer's trip is also part of a wider diplomatic push by Europe towards Beijing. In recent weeks, the Prime Ministers of Finland and Ireland both visited China. Reports also claim that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is expected to travel to Beijing next month. And after concluding his visit to Beijing and Shanghai, Keir Starmer will travel on to Tokyo to meet Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. So Starmer faces a difficult task as he seeks to warm ties with Beijing without provoking a backlash from Washington and without upsetting Donald Trump at a time of growing transatlantic strain. Well, to discuss this further, we're joined by Peter Kurzin, a geopolitical commentator, live from London. Welcome to the programme. So we've seen US President Donald Trump threaten countries like Canada, for example, with repercussions over doing trade deals with China. So how carefully does Keir Starmer have to tread now?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Firstly, I think it's an interesting time. The UK is but a reflection of the broader systemic changes that we're seeing. Trump is abandoning a lot of what has predicated the international system, especially since 1945, of which, of course, the UK, being a global power at the time, helped to create. Now, Britain has to tread carefully, but it certainly is not going to do it passively. I have been very critical of Starmer's approaches to the Trump administration, but his, well, not willingness, but obvious need to respond to Trump's outrageous comments over NATO's role in Afghanistan, for example, I think demonstrates that even Keir Starmer is reaching a point. Britain's relationship with China specifically has long been, you could argue, a quiet tug of war between economic opportunity and obviously this security unease. On the one side, you have the world's second largest economy. It is always going to be relevant. But on the other side, persistent concerns over espionage, data acquisition, and of course, political interference. We've had sleeper agents. We've had what's otherwise known as influencer agents, individuals who will come over from the CCP and try to directly influence policymakers or political elites to make or encourage lobby effectively more favorable laws on behalf of China, which includes this mega embassy in what is, for the UK at least, a historical building, the Mint, opposite the Tower of London. And I myself think it's an absolutely terrible idea, but clearly Starmer and the Labour government think it's a good idea. The analysis that I've come to understand means that they won't be able to sort of interfere with, say, the optics, fiber optics cables and other sort of hardware that goes
okay,
around.
let me just jump in there, actually, if I may. I mean, you mentioned China there. What might China be gaining from this meeting then with Starmer in terms of trade and in the political sense?
Well, I've demonstrated that in my previous response, that China is going to gain quite a lot. It gains a footing in British financial institutions. England knows, Westminster knows that they have to do deals with China. And moreover, I think it makes sense. It's no surprise that we have the Europeans all at once effectively coming down to Beijing. This is a coordinated effort from Berlin, Paris, London, and others to engage China, because the United States can no longer be seen as a reliable ally. And China doesn't really have to do anything. They just have to sort of sit back and offer themselves as that more stable, long-termist thinking partner. They gain more politically than economically. It's not expecting sweeping trade breakthroughs. Xi has been pretty clear on his approach towards Western capitals, especially in Europe, because of the willingness of Europe to limit China's access to certain industries or markets in Europe. But this obviously is the first in 8 years of a prime minister visit, and that will help China legitimize its narrative or perspective as a bastion of stability versus the US, which is attacking anyone from adversaries to allies.
And when it comes
So
to Europe there, as you mentioned, sorry, forgive me, as it comes to Europe, as you mentioned there, how closely will EU countries be watching Starmer's visit? I mean, they may also be concerned about Donald Trump's tariffs and trade policies.
Well, of course they are, but the EU is a supranational entity. It's an economic bloc with a capacity to rival the United States in certain industries if they find effective deregulation and other policy shifts that we are beginning to see. The difference is that the UK, because of Brexit, which is possibly the worst decision the country's made in the post-45 order, is it's a single country. Therefore, it doesn't have the economic weight. Of course, it has London and the financial industry, but it does not have that single biggest market. And what you're going to be seeing is how the Europeans monitor the UK based on how much they can work with the UK. The one comparative advantage that Britain still wields is its intelligence network, its defense and security knowledge. The Europeans are very good at economics. There's lots of things that they can leverage better than the British, but the British have this certain thing, the relationship with the Americans, say, through the Five Eyes and other means by which that they can help counterbalance against perhaps perceived Chinese threats. So they'll be watching what Starmer focuses on, whether he's consistent in messaging, in telegraphing what he prioritizes, also what Macron has said, what Merz will say, and so on, because you also, in the last point I'd say, passing back to you, is simply that these three, they represent the core E3. And so if the French, the British and the Germans can find a way to coordinate on broader foreign policy, then that will simplify and streamline Britain's ability to, I think, intertwine again with the EU. Because there are rumblings of a rapprochement, revisiting the idea of a customs union. So this will be a very important demonstration for the British of their diplomatic play and their capacity to win round the Europeans longer term, as well as hedging and balancing with China.
Peter Kerzin, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Firstpost Spotlight.
Thank you.
Thank you. The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice. The conversations everyone is having and the ones they're avoiding. It's the same show, but this new year, Firstpost America gets a new look. I'm Kerry Johnston, and this is Firstpost America.